Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a discussion we really believe should happen more often. Let me give you a bit of context before we start this show. Out of 130 crores that we are as an Indian population, 2.34 crores of us are persons with disabilities. In short, we call it PWDs. And of these, close to 1.3 crores are employable. But only 36 lakhs are actually employed, which means 66% unemployment rate exists amongst people with disabilities. Unfortunate, but that's the data. You must also know, while there are marginal jobs being mobilized for people with disabilities in the unorganized sectors, today they aspire to be in white collared corporate jobs because a lot of them are educated and they deserve equitable opportunities in the corporate sector. Digital transformation also in the last decade or so has made it even more possible for corporates to create job opportunities for them. But there is still, how should we say, there remain a lot of barriers, mostly to start with, barriers in our head, mental barriers. Where to start the process of hiring people with disabilities, where to hire them from, whom to hire from, what role to then assign to them, what kind of growth opportunities can we offer to them, how to truly make them feel included. We will discuss all this with a very interesting panel that we've gathered today. Uh, let's today first, before we start the discussion, um, let's find out through this discussion where we are as a country and where are we headed, both as a corporate community and as a country, when it comes to inclusion for people with disabilities. Welcome to this discussion, aptly named Challenges Supersede Willingness, a reality check on the challenges and opportunities to drive persons with disability inclusion in corporate India. This, I must tell you, is an initiative by Sarthi and supported by SHRM. I have the honor of having a great panel today, like I said, and I would like to introduce them now in no particular order other than alphabetical. Um, Ladies and gentlemen, first welcome Achal Khanna, CEO SHRM in India, APAC and MENA region. Welcome Achal, welcome to the program. A quick introduction about Achal. Achal brings in an industry perspective from across India and other parts of the world about how corporates have started expressing their intent and perhaps even started taking baby steps, but find it challenging to drive inclusion. We're going to have a lot of conversation with Achal about what's happening. As Sarthi, our intent is to understand these challenges and therefore weave a solution towards the same. Achal, welcome to the program.
Thank
Please
you.
also welcome Devika Nair, Senior Manager, DNI, Marcom, and CSR for Religious Group India. Welcome, Devika. A quick word about what Devika does as a person who has driven direct hiring for persons with disability at Alleges and promoted the same across other organizations by hiring for them. She understands the operational as well as the mindset challenges and roadblocks corporate face firsthand. She works closely with the inclusion ecosystem in Bangalore, for example, with skill partners on one hand and corporate on the other. She's going to help build a narrative around defining the stage of maturity today corporates are sitting at with respect to inclusion. Devika, welcome to the program.
Thanks,
Please
Sunil.
also welcome Richa Bansal, the founder director of Sarthi. Welcome, Richa, as she appears on screen. Welcome. The founder director of Sarthi, Richa, is Sarthi, by the way, is a unique customer contact center where 90% of its workforce are persons with disabilities. She's of a firm belief that everyone is good at something and has manifested that through her work at Sarthi, which currently services brands across ITC Foods, Daikin Air Conditioners, Coding Ninjas, Amazon, just to name a few. In the past, she has worked as general manager fundraising for CRY, Child Relief and You. And before that, she spent more than a decade in sales and marketing across media and telecom industry. Welcome, Richa. And finally, Sandeep Bidani. A lot of us already know him. Sandeep is a leadership and culture transformation consultant and executive coach, an inclusion evangelist, and India's first person with disability senior HR leader himself. He's the ex-CHRO of KPMG, Amex, and IBM. He works on building future-ready leaders and organizations and is immensely passionate about the topic at hand. So welcome again, Achal, Devika, Richa, and Sandeep. My name is Vineet Panchi. I'll be moderating this session. So basically, my role will be to point my questions at you. Sometimes, especially when we are doing it digitally, it becomes difficult. So I will call out your name in terms of who I'd like to, specifically give the question to and who I'm addressing. And let me start by asking all of you, and maybe Achal, you can start by briefly answering the first one, and then I will go to each of you. Um, are we as a country, and especially corporate India, ready for including persons with disability in our work communities? And if so, where are we on that journey? Achal.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a wonderful discussion, and our timing is right. So, business, governments, not-for-profit, and other organizations are finding it necessary to adopt a global mindset to remain viable and relevant in today's global marketplace, as world is flat. We all know that. As organizations today recognize the importance of developing greater cross culture competence, diversity and inclusion have become an essential bedrock for successful organization and stable societies. So it is not only organization, but even stable societies. So since you shared some numbers, so let me share some numbers. According to survey conducted by SHAM, Society of Human Resource Management in India, and it is specific to India, about 55% of the respondents say that their organizations strongly promotes diversity and inclusion. However, the interpretation of the phrase and the methods used to achieve the goal vary widely among the companies and the regions. Even in the companies with most successful diversity programs, the impetus and the tone emanate from the most senior ranks of the organizations, because it has to be driven from the top. We all know that 60% of the respondents to the survey say the leading advocates for diversity and the inclusion in their organizations are the CEOs and the management or the board people, followed by HR head, which is the 42% said, and Sandeep would vouch for that. But all is not so dark and sad.
Hmm.
All the same time, to ensure diversity and inclusion for specially abled people, a lot of Indian companies are nonetheless systematically widening their recruitment pool. They are
Interesting.
conscious that they need to do that because they need differently able people, because they want to just tick the box because they know that they are competent, and are they would make the overall productivity level much higher. So that is what they really believe in, and that is what the data say. So
Hmm. So thank you
to
for that opening statement, Achal. I want to
yes.
quickly go to Devika with the same kind of context-setting question so that I can build a more robust conversation around it. And Devika, my question remains the same. Where are we on this journey from your perspective?
Um, I think, I mean, great statistics and information, shared by Achal. And honestly, like from a very personal experience, from an organization perspective, when we started this conversation 7, 8 years back, honestly, there was not a lot of willingness within corporate India because we're a talent organization. At the core of everything we do, this is what it is. We create opportunities for people who otherwise might. So that time we didn't see a lot of willingness. There was a lot of question. There was a lot of apprehension around the why part of it. um, lot of us, we didn't find a lot of champions around us when we started these conversations initially. Cut to now, I think we have seen the curve really go up, especially in some of these regions, in this country, where diversity and inclusion, like I don't have to now go with a case study on why do you need to hire, but the conversation has now changed to how do you hire? What are the challenges that you may foresee, and how do you kind of prepare yourself for it? So we're not any longer kind of stuck on the why part of it, which I think is very encouraging because we really didn't see a lot of champions around us at that point. But now, with the first movers who came up with some people, we saw some successes happening. We've seen the growth or the shift within the organizations in the country. Have all of them started hiring? Maybe not. But at least slow steps are being taken everywhere. Everyone is conscious, everyone is aware. Nobody will send you back from the door if you walk in with this conversation saying that I don't have time for this. They will invite you in and they'll ask you to, help them out with it if they've not figured it out. So it is
So
promising.
thank you very much, Devika. And I'm presuming that this is a continuum on which various organizations will be at different stages. And I don't know if we are competent today to even judge outside of the system where this continuum really will have people on it. But in this whole journey of evolution, from you said there was a time when people said, should we or should we not hire? Why should we be hiring? To how should we be hiring? How evolved do we think corporate India is in terms of driving inclusion? And I'm not talking whether they've started to at least recognize this as important, but what is the stage of evolution? If we were to tell someone who's never done this before versus somebody who's invested in the D&I agenda and have been hiring for a long time, what do you think is the evolution? Can you map that out for us? Let me ask Devika first, and then I'll probably go to Sandeep.
So, in my opinion, I think when we start having these conversations, the initial conversations, even though there is a lot of reception, there's also a lot of confusion in terms of what kind of roles can you open up, what kind of disabilities can you hire. There is a natural tendency to also go to orthopedic related disabilities first instead of hiring, say, sensory disabilities. There are a lot of stereotypes still that are attached to what is comfort level and how much do they want to push themselves, which is where we kind of step in to have a dialogue. There are also some companies that have gone up to the curve, but that's not the majority story. A lot of them are still in the initial stages. One main thing I think, Vineet, which really needs to happen is you need to move away from traditional hiring formats, traditional recruitment behaviors, if you really need to bring in diverse talent into your organization, which is what a lot of companies struggle with. It's not easy to let go of standard protocols, and we love our frameworks and best practices so much that somebody coming in and telling you this is not going to work, it does shake things up, and it sometimes takes a little bit time for the organization to get to on the other side. But it's a slow movement, but it's happening.
Richa, in your experience from actually hiring people, if you can just build on what Devika just said, which is change the recruitment ways and patterns and frameworks. What has been your experience in that area? What has changed and what needs to change?
So I think, given the fact that we are a 4-year-old organization, it was a learning curve for us ourselves. We consciously hired persons with disabilities. So the learning curve for us was more in terms of there were institutions where we were hiring from, but how we were hiring, whom we were hiring, and what the onboarding process was very, very different. So where a regular onboarding process for any other employee would be fairly standard in nature, here it was not so. So here it required that much more hand holding. It required that much more intense first 3 months commitment that was required. So as I always tell people, when we even pick up an outsourced process, that first 3 months are very, very important to be patient. And I think patience is a huge virtue that corporates have to build in if we are to look at recruiting persons with disabilities, because it is not an on-off button. It doesn't work as soon as you put this person on the job and he will start delivering within the next 3 days. It is a slow process. And also, as Devika mentioned, it is not the regular hiring protocols that function here. You are not necessarily going to just put out an ad and hire a person. There will be walk-in interviews. Here it is far more intense and far more personal in nature. You have to understand the person's uh, at a very psychographic level. You need to understand him to be able to map him. So, just to give you an example, there are people who come with late disabilities. There are people who come with disabilities from the birth. To be able to deal with them cannot be a standard protocol. You have to deal with them very differently. And that, I think, is a knowledge which is only an acquired knowledge. And therefore, when it comes to corporates who want to hire persons with disabilities, they need hand holding to be able to give them an understanding on these aspects. And that is something I've learned.
I'm presuming HR teams will first need to be trained and exposed to the entire new ecosystem before we can start to,
Absolutely.
Before I get into the details of the challenges that HR teams face and what do we need to do in that area, tell me, I mean, we've always heard of working with PWDs has always been a CSR initiative of companies. Do you think it is now becoming more strategic in terms of operations, or is it still seen as something we need to do for charity? And any one of you.
I don't think it is being looked at as a charity anymore. At least I can talk from my experience. Maybe about few years back, people were looking at hiring persons with disabilities in marginal roles and were looking at it more like a tick in the box. But as Achal mentioned, and so did Devika, I think the why is not necessarily now a conversation at all, because people understand that there is value in hiring persons with disabilities.
Achal, Sorry, Achal, and please, just wave your hand in case you need to add something, because I don't want to just keep pointing. Achal, from your experience of working with so many HR leaders and CEOs across India, what is your view on how have they started seeing it? From my experience, I still see a lot of this coming from the CSR angle. Do you think people are changing, at least in conversations, in the way they're looking at PWDs?
Yeah, means, I feel, to be very honest with you, to be treated this as a CSR, I feel disgusted with that word. I'm sorry, I'm being like that, because they don't need sympathy. We are talking about diversity, inclusion, equity. They need to be treated like I would say I am disabled if I am treating them with disability. So that is how we need to be treated. We need to treat them with with respect and dignity. And if we don't do that, we are disabled. So CSR angle does not apply to them. CSR angle need to be applied to many other government projects, for poverty, for all other things, but not for people who are differently able. And I would say there are a lot of examples, of corporate India, where Lemon Tree, where there is Cafe Coffee Day, who have hired and who have done such a successful hiring and a lot of productivity. They are successful. Then there is Microsoft, who have put in their DNA that they have to have people who are differently able, because it helps them with innovation. So their innovation agenda is driven with that.
I'm glad to hear it from the CEO of the largest HR organization in India. I think if you start talking like this, I'm sure a lot of people will be influenced, and my personal appreciation for that, as well as the power that you bring to that kind of comment. Moving on, we spoke briefly about the challenges that HR teams are facing, will face when it comes to driving inclusion. My question to Sandeep, and maybe then to Devika and Richa, because you've been in active hiring of these people and supporting people to hire these people. Sandeep, what additional training do we need to give to HR guys to be able to be more empathetic first to the entire situation and then to actually operationalize something like this?
Thanks, Vineet. Very pertinent question. I think the biggest challenge lies in what we think we know, and most times it's about if people don't have a context to operationalizing inclusion beyond the stated objective or the standard templates that exist, then they don't know what they don't know. So Devika referred to the standard templates and methodologies and frameworks. And we've realized over a period that operations leaders as well as talent acquisition teams don't know what they don't know. They are trying to fit the methodology in the same standard. And with multiple conversations that Richa and I have been having around, let's say, how a job description is written out, you got to start slicing a job description literally into transactions and then start looking at the transaction and say, if this job description was like 80% of what it looks like, somebody with a visual impairment would be very easily able to do this, and there is a very large pool of very good talent sitting out there. Now, those are conversations that today HR leaders and talent acquisition leaders are mostly not equipped to do. So that's a very clear gap that we see. The second is a lot of these roles that we see are in the service sector industries. Of course, there are some path breakers that Achal referred to in the hospitality sector, but largely these sit in the services sector, which are largely tech enabled. As you start moving to more traditional industries, the ability to slice and dice roles and then map the capability matrix. I'm using the word capability. You could look at, many people would call it, what is the ability that an individual brings to the table in spite of the limitations. That methodology or process does not exist. There have been, I would use the word structured effort around it by a set of bodies. Enable India took some shots at it. They've created some. There are many others, but it's not been mapped to multiple industries. It's been mapped to a set of rules. So that's the second piece that is missing. The third is, and it's there is a very interesting analogy that if you're trying to make French toast, you can't fry the toast and then add the omelette on top or the egg on top and imagine that it's French toast. It's not. When roles are getting crafted, when organizations are being crafted, when the job descriptions are being written, the concept of a potential diversity hiring in that role is not embedded in the job description when it's being written out.
Very
so these are very subtle differences or challenges that exist for the talent acquisition and the HR leaders of today. So this is a huge gap and a huge opportunity.
Very interesting. I hope HR leaders are listening to this and have already started making notes in terms of how they're going to now create new kinds of job descriptions, if at all.
I will
just
add
a-
something to
Sure,
the
please.
research, just wanted to add, the biggest challenge is to change the mindset and the biases. Many HR professionals, managers think that the work can't be done by the differently able people. So we need to change those biases. Another challenge is that, they think that the costs will go up on training them. Those kind of biases we need to change. Another uh, challenge is sometimes, is when they do a good job, it is a mindset again and again we need to change. And Sherm has done enough and more research how to remove those biases and what are the tools and templates which need to be used when they need to be promoted. And the bias comes there too. They don't get the right promotion at the right time. So all these beliefs are in the mindset and we need to remove those biases at the right time.
Thank you. Thank you, Achal. And pertinent point. I might come back to that, and we can talk about why those biases exist and if they are really real, or because they're called biases. I'm sure it's a thing we should definitely discuss. Um, just adding to what Sandeep said, and if I can frame something around it, because HR folks do not really know how to hire them, they're not fully trained, and because their leaders are saying, expand the DNI agenda, is that why a lot of PWDs are being hired at marginal roles? Do you think there's a connection between that? Sandeep, Devika?
Sandeep can go first and then I can go, I guess.
No. Devika, you could go first. I think Sandeep did the last one.
All right. So I think two things, even to adding to the previous question, Vineet, I don't think HR can do this on its own. It has to be a business HR partnership. We are very clear when we do this conversation with any organization that the business has to sit with the TA team if they are really serious about getting diverse talent into their teams, because it's ultimately in their teams that these people are going. So, one operating without the other is not going to lead to a successful sort of a show at the end of the day. Because the kind of the whole cycle that we follow, we start right from what Sandeep was saying in terms of analysis, the job analysis or the job description analysis is like the first thing that we do when an organization comes and says, okay, I'm ready to hire. Because there's a lot of expectation that we need to set with the company and the TA teams on what does it mean to bring a person with disability in the organization. So a lot of them sometimes come with these profiles. Funnily enough, what I've started seeing is if you're not finding people in the regular pool, let's open it up for PWD pool and maybe we'll find something, which is never going to happen. If you're
Right.
not getting a mainframe developer in your regular pool, opening it up in a PWD pool is suddenly not going to change the things for you, because we need to understand the pool reality of persons with disability as well. So, what kind of pool is available in the market? What kind of talent do they bring? Being able to map that back to your organization and say, okay, these kind of roles are suitable roles where we can bring them in, maybe train them a little, empower them a little bit, and then they'll be able to do the role. I think all those conversations need to happen much before anything from a hiring perspective starts. We don't get to the hiring table before we are not sure that the organization understands all these elements first. And then comes the point of sensitization programs with the TA teams, the HR teams, the business leaders, all of them before the candidate pool walks in for an interview as well. We've found this method successful. I know there might be others who might not be doing this or might be skipping it. We've been very rigorous. We've even told clients who want to shortcut it, saying that we won't be able to support, because we know if anything from this entire wheel falls down, you will have a bad experience. It will be a bad experience for the company, it will be a bad experience for the candidate, and then it will be like, no, we don't want to hire from the PWD pool, we're not equipped enough, and it's just you don't want to give a bad experience to anyone. So business, TA, HR have to work hand in hand. It's not one person's responsibility to make this inclusive.
Sandeep, still on the question of are we hiring marginal roles to fill up the DNI, numbers that leaders might have said? What do you think is happening there?
So there are two mindsets that at least when we've been speaking, we've experienced. There are organizations, and you said there is a spectrum of maturity. There is a spectrum of maturity. Organizations that are large and scaled, who sort of in the initial scale went and hired 100, 200 over a period. They sort of are sitting on a target this year. I've heard from a lot of TA leaders. In fact, we've had some very interesting conversations with people who drive the DEI agenda, and with multiple gaps that we see. But the immediate one to respond to that is the talent acquisition person. I mean, they just immediately respond to it. So they have, most of them are sitting on a target. as you delve deeper, it is always the low-hanging fruit that organizations want to grab, which is really the locomotor disabled person, which is really more a building accessibility or stuff like that. Beyond that, it does not really impact how they deliver the role. And that's also where a lot of talent pool for even slightly higher level roles and all is available. So it just sort of fixes their immediate need. And as traditional talent acquisition leaders, I mean, you got to get numbers, you got to do it in time. Those are your traditional metrics that exist. So that tends to drive behavior. The more mature ones, and I've had interesting conversations with some in the semiconductor design and certain other areas. They said, well, we are hiring for talent. If the person has a disability, so be it. So that's a very extreme view of how you're looking at it, because that pool is very limited, right? And then there are many organizations that sit in the middle of those two spectrums, that you're hiring for talent and everything else we will enable. So that's the kind of range. But in a very traditional TA sense, it's the numbers that you need to get in. Off late, when Richa and I have been speaking with a set of mature organizations, they're expanding that to even economically impacted sectors of society. And somewhere you sense that blend of CSR coming in. So you got to sort of watch out for that, because at times, it's just the agenda gets widened. So that's been happening.
So why do you feel people are not able to move beyond orthopedically challenged candidates when it comes to including PWDs? Richard, you've been hiring a lot.
Yes. So in fact, the most obvious thing when it comes to hiring persons with disabilities, orthopedically challenged people seem to be very easy to hire. And as Devika mentioned, when it comes to sensory disability, there are various mind blocks that we have. We have mental blocks. Okay, what kind of training do we have to impart? Do we have to change the equipment which these people will eventually be using? Unfortunately, there are still so many people who believe that people with visual disability will actually be using a braille keyboard. I mean, it's a matter of awareness. And I think I will go back to also what Achal mentioned, that somewhere there is a lack of awareness. Now, till such time people do not become aware, they will not be able to drop the perception that this disability is easy to work with, and this disability is going to be very strenuous for us. It's going to be a lot of hard work. And just to quote another experience here, having worked with, like, we have 70% of our people are people with visual impairment. And our experience tells us that people with visual impairment, the initial few months are definitely, you invest in bringing them up to speed, but eventually they are brilliant both in terms of the productivity, their commitment levels, and even their creativity, their ability to actually find opportunities within the organization to contribute that much more. So I think it is again one of the biases and one of the easy low hanging fruits that they want to grab.
Devika, you've been specifically in the hiring industry and you deal with various clients. What is the kind of brief that you usually get? Can you, if that's okay for you to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I won't call it a grief. I think I'll call it a hesitation. Depending on where you are in your cycle, if you're a starter, then it's always like, I'm not sure about sensory. Like, everyone will come talk big, but the minute they have to start, there will be a caveat saying, let's go with ortho. And I don't want sensory right now. So there's a huge hesitation, but then we try and kind of break that hesitation by giving our own example. We've had several clients of ours who've walked into our organization because we have majorly hired in the sensory impairment space, severe disability space. So we have visually impaired recruiters, account managers, we have hearing impaired mechanical engineers, we have severe disability folks working in the recruitment domain. So we are able to show them what that culture looks like, and then kind of draw them to the concept of you can do this as well, and there are organizations and people to support you. But that hesitation, I think, initially to get over it is massive. The second thing is, I think a lot of them, like how I was saying, moving away from traditional hiring practices. So being very rigid with, I need a BCom, I need a graduate, I need an MBA from this sort of a background, this sort of a CGPA and all that stuff. It's very hard to kind of, meet what we call as minimum qualification criteria in organization. It's unrealistic because of the fact, not because PWDs didn't want to get it, but the way our education system is in India, they didn't have access to a lot of these things. Like, I think till date, visually impaired people are discouraged to take anything in the technology, IT, computer space. Even maths or science as a subject, they're told to get into arts and those kind of fields because that's it's been told to them that's the so of course they will end up doing some certification or diploma programs on the side if they want to get equipped into the other aspects because the platform is not there. So for organizations to even come down from those minimum eligibility criteria is such a huge challenge to convince leadership to get the sign-offs and if you're aligned globally, then make that case, get those exemptions, and come back. There's a lot of hesitation in changing or moving things that you already have set. So in all those areas, then you start seeing people kind of take a step back, and sometimes it takes us years to place one or two candidates in a company.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a
I can sense I can sense that the gap between the intention that leaders have and the execution is still large. And what do you think we need to do then? We picked up things like, yeah, of course, Achal said we need to constantly talk about the biases we have and stuff. But what are the real operational things that one can do in that area to fill that gap?
One thing which I would say where Devika has made this point specifically for visually impaired, and I do a lot of work with visually impaired people, and I support a lot of schools. They struggle with giving their examination, and that is where the CSR funds need to be deployed, not for the recruitment of these people. Those kids need to give their examination because they struggle. 10,000 rupees people charge so that they can give their examination. So that is another area I wanted to highlight this.
No, I think it's very fair. In fact, when we do go to corporate and we differentiate between the actual recruitment of PWDs and supporting them at other places, this should be one of the things we should definitely suggest.
Because I just thought that this is a very important thing because they do not have the support system to study, and they are very brilliant students.
Sure.
And because they do
I think that's what Devika was mentioning, that the pool is small because of the way our education system is and the systems.
And though another bright side is that NTPC, which is our largest government sector enterprise, their learning and development head is visually impaired, and she's doing a brilliant job. That's the bright side.
Yeah. So we discussed the challenges at, the mental challenges of hiring PWDs, then really recruiting them, and what are some of the processes that we need to put in place. Sandeep also mentioned that it really will, the HR community will have to work to be able to first train themselves and move on. Thanks for that, Richa, Devika, Ashok, Sandeep. I want to talk a little bit about the fact that you've now hired people, even with great difficulty. The leadership is in place and their intention is right. The HR people have been trained at least to get some people on. What is the onboarding process? I mean, what does one need to do, again, in terms of training ourselves to be able to onboard these people really well? Let me ask Richa first, then I'll go to Devika, Sandeep and Ashok. Yeah.
So I think, Vineet, when it comes to onboarding, quite similar to what Devika mentioned regarding hiring, we cannot necessarily follow the same protocols. Because when it comes to onboarding persons with disabilities, you again need to understand where they are coming from. And when I say where they are coming from, it is not just about their disability, but also understand a little bit more about their personal journey, because that really does make a lot of difference to understand exactly what their journey onwards is going to look like. For example, in our case at Parathi, we make sure that there are mentors who get assigned to each and every new person who joins the team. Because while on one hand, we are talking about the work they have to deliver, they equally are new to the whole concept of working in a corporate culture and an environment. And to be able to give them an induction in the corporate environment, you need someone perhaps who's a little more experienced than you. Similarly, when it comes to onboarding, as much as it is required for the person who has joined the team, it is required for the rest of the employees as well. And that is what Sandeep and I we keep talking about. So why there is sensitization that has to take place for other co-workers so that they are able to include these people in the true sense of the word inclusion. And it is not just again a tick in the box. The culture has to be created so that they are onboarded with absolute ease. And of course, the
So,
rest of the things true, whether it is the physical onboarding, you provide access, you provide them help, the mobility, etc. But I think those are fairly, very easy things to do. The harder part is to create an inclusive environment for them to get onboarded easily.
so what I hear you saying, Richa, is that the entire organization will have to be sensitized,
Absolutely.
not just the people that will work closely with PWDs. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
how does one go
Your
about doing
ground
that?
staff, including
How
your
does one
ground
go
staff.
about doing that, Sandeep? I mean, where does one start if you were to
Yeah,
sensitize an
I think
organization?
the first important conversation there, Vineet, is, and I was talking to somebody yesterday who had a question, and that sort of fits into what you're asking. Are you going to provide, let's say, transport to a set of people while you do not provide transport to others? Are you going to create, a buddy who will escort somebody who is visually impaired to the seat over a period, and after that they sort of take on. And there was a very interesting question that I got, which said, but would that not be seen as not, we are an equal opportunity organization, and would that not be seen as unequal? And the difference between equality and equity has to be discussed very clearly in these organizations.
Yes.
And Achal mentioned the word equity, and to your question, I'm connecting that scenario. That if you feel that by creating these one or two or three accessibility support systems, you're being unequal, or are you actually creating equity? That is a very important conversation to start in organizations. So that's really the first starting step. The second is, Achal mentioned investments. If you're investing in a software which is off the shelf, connects with your systems, somewhere the business cases and use cases, compelling use cases, which talk about how the ROI works in your favor in terms of longevity, tenure, stickiness, all of that. Those are some use cases that have to be built. And organizations need to take that lead, including organizations like SHRM can take those leads in terms of building those use cases, working with organizations. So these are some start points that need to happen in the external ecosystem and the internal one. The third is, as I said, inclusion has to be on a day-to-day basis. Is the individual going to come in and start working on a task, get trained? So obviously training methodology and all of that. But how do you start involving the individual in day-to-day team decision making? Somebody's got to think through that, and that conversation has to happen with the managers. If they're going to come in, if they can read but they can't speak, and they're going to look at content, can you send them that content a day earlier to say, do you want to add any input to this? Because their speed of reading and interpreting all of that on a slide when you're sitting in a meeting may be very different. So are you working to different paces? And we got to realize that even without disabilities, we have different team members whom we operate with differently. There are some people who are very good with visual stuff. There are some people who like detail. We do that with each other. So how is this any different in terms of creating that inclusion so that that capability is built? So I'm using the word, we have to create ecosystems with focus on inclusive development of these team members that we bring in. So that's all that is important.
Very interesting. Thank you for that, Sandeep. I mean, really, we should also be talking about then what can we do as organizations who have been, really concerned about PWD, especially SHRM. Achal, tell us a little about what are you doing as an organization to make awareness go up, to sensitizing leaders. What is the role that SHRM is playing, especially you as a leader? Give us a little insight in that.
Well, SHRM invests a lot on research. We spend around $30-40 million, not just for this purpose, but for anything to do to workplace, but specifically for differently abled people. But it is not only ortho or visually impaired, but also on autistic, also on people with Down syndrome. What are the best jobs? Suited jobs for them. Those research papers are then circulated to the business elites, the corporate elites, as well as the government elites. And we do a lot of advocacy work so that they are given life of dignity. It is not just with the physically challenged, but even mentally challenged people. We work with them very, very closely on this. And I would be more than happy to share those research work which we would have done. And we do invest in that so that they can live life with dignity.
And we really appreciate that, especially under your leadership. Do keep this group and us informed about what other initiatives are happening, and maybe we can talk about it in subsequent programs.
Absolutely.
Richa, my last couple of questions. I know the way we are running on time. You run an organization, which is what percentage of people at the organization, Sarthi, are PWDs?
So we have 90% of our people are persons with disabilities, and 70% are persons with visual impairment. Why that, of course, becomes important is because we've been talking about mostly people with orthopedically challenged who get hired. So we consciously started hiring persons with visual impairment.
And so tell us a little about the business and operational challenges that you faced. There's a rare company which would have 90% of people with PWDs.
Yeah. So
how do you even run a company like that?
Honestly, it's all in people's mind. It runs like any other company.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. It runs like any other company. First year, I would say, was extremely challenging because it was a learning for me as well, because I was also learning how to deal with persons with disabilities. But I soon realized that if I have my vision in place, if I have my objectives and goals in place, I just have to sink them in. And that's exactly what I have done. Today, on one hand, we are not only skilling and training them, we are ensuring that we are providing them growth opportunities within the organization. So we don't hire from outside when we have to create people managers. So from an organization of 5 to 100, we have actually created people managers from within the team. Similarly,
I'm saying after that, I'd also like to know how you actually managed to convince your clients to give you business. Because, you have a business that has an extremely large number of people with disabilities. And the market is anyway challenged because they are yet to accept the reality that people can actually deliver. So that's a subsequent question which I'd like you to answer.
So you're absolutely right, Vineet. Initially, it was difficult. And yes, I will not say that we were not considered a CSR agenda. It took us a huge amount of effort to break that barrier in the minds of corporates. However, as Devika mentioned, it is a show and tell at the end of the day. So I think what worked for us was just proving it to one client with one project and 3 months, which was taken up more like a challenge and something that had to be turned around and delivered. And it was a pure sales project. So I think today all our clients are extremely confident of what we are capable of because we have success stories in place. And
Very
that
interesting.
gives them confidence that they can trust us with more such projects. So it is a pure show and tell. And I encourage a lot of corporates to visit our office, same as what Devika mentioned, because it is important for them to know that we work exactly the same way as their organizations do. Our
Very
people deliver the same kind of results as their people do. And we work on the systems the same way as their people do. And that I think becomes a huge it helps break the barrier.
Devika, what's your experience in that area and convincing people to even try that out?
Absolutely, the show and tell way. I think when we started as an organization, we couldn't go to our clients and say, hey, hire if we did not have anybody in our organization. So we first started hiring internally. And we consciously made a decision to hire sensory impairments. We also made a conscious decision of hiring them on the business side, on the sales side of things, so that we are able to kind of give them that career path and opportunity. Today, some of our successful account managers are persons with, complete vision impairment.
Oh,
They're
interesting.
handling huge clients. The clients know that they're visually impaired, and one conversation down, they're absolutely, game with the whole idea. They come back and ask us. We've hired, I mentioned hearing impaired mechanical grads, who now our clients have taken away, saying that we want them at the client site and not in the office. So we've seen these signs of encouragement. I think it's a lot of show and tell, and that gives confidence, which is why we've also kind of left our office doors open. We have a employment center for persons with disability. We call it the Garv Se Center,
Very,
which Garv Se Center. We
very interesting.
collaborated with Enable India and we've opened it. It's in our Bangalore office. Anyone, anytime is welcome to come in and walk in, and it's an experiential center. You can see, what kind of jobs people are getting hired, what's the life cycle we follow. You can get the entire, knowledge bank right there. And if you walk into the floor, which you're welcome to do always, you will see people around and you will see that the culture is no different than any other organization. There's absolutely nothing that you will feel that we have done very drastically different. And I was smiling when Sandeep was talking about, who will guide them, what if one fire
Uh,
emergency happens, and we've gotten all those questions. And we've kind of, been able to tell them with the right sensitization, with the teams, with the amount of, we even say don't handhold them too much. The first 1 month of navigation and all, they're independent like everybody else, and they can just go around, get their water, get their coffee,
oh, nice.
crack a joke on
Girls.
the water cooler thing. So it's
Yeah.
they see that, and then that's where the confidence builds. And that's the good thing about the corporate community here, that I've seen that everyone who's done it is very willing to handhold 10 others and show them how
Oh,
it's done.
yes.
So if
And I
you
love
are,
the name Girls Day. I think we should
yeah,
attach pride to
it is.
all
It
these
is with a lot
initiatives.
of pride that Allegis carries this cause.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sandeep, specific question to you. Your experience when you're training people to become more empathetic, growth focused, um, and I'm presuming you're also focused on operations. We can't just hire people and not have the same kind of productivity as we would expect from anyone else. What has your experience been? How open have organizations been in accepting not just the fact that they need to hire PWDs, but also training their own people and sensitizing
Organizations have been fairly open to it, but again, it's a small number. These are large-scale organizations with a very clear agenda. They do recognize that there is a maturity level gap that exists from an India market perspective, and they're willing to work on that. To that extent, we worked with a lot of large organizations who have ensured that managers, so hiring managers of persons with disabilities, we brought them together for a lot of calibration conversation. So in a manner, they are learning from each other. That becomes a very, very powerful tool. And the other has been challenging their, to Achal's point, are there biases that you're going to give grace marks to this individual? Because in many managers, that mindset of, I am operating to a grace marks kind of person. And breaking that mindset has been an amazing learning to say, are you expecting the same and are you challenging enough to expect the same? So those have been some hard conversations with managers. In the same breath, equipping them with understanding how to operate differently. So much so, we've had conversations where managers have gone back to their teams and said, what would you want to see differently? How can we work better with this individual? How can we interact better with this individual? And those are some very hard questions to be led. And that's changed a lot. The second aspect of it has been working with persons with disabilities and looking at their career development. The reality also is that with mature organizations, as people come in and find these jobs, it's been a very long journey. It's like a battle to get a role like that and, settle in. So they just want to stay put there. At times they won't skill themselves. They may not want to, and progressive organizations say, what next? So we've gone and asked that, what would you want to do? And a lot of persons with disabilities have said, can you equip my ecosystem on sign language? I can communicate better. Can you do this? Can you do that? And the challenge there has been, what stops you from changing your ecosystem? What stops you from equipping your ecosystem? And we've had case studies where people have, using help from their children, recorded simple sign language videos and taken that forward to their own teams in their WhatsApp group. So they, okay, let me teach you sign language so that you can communicate better with me. And that mindset shift that the organization will do everything to create my ecosystem is also something that we've been breaking. On a lighter note, we had asked a group of persons with disabilities working with large corporates, what is it that you would want to see differently? And they said, if we could crack jokes in sign language, I would love it. and we sort of wrote it down.
I'm sure there are jokes in sign language.
Yeah. So if people are, and the challenge was that, okay, teach them, and I'm sure they'll crack a joke back. So you have to bring that environment to that level.
To each of you then, I mean, I'm cognizant of time. As people evangelizing D&I for PWDs in India, what would you really want to see over the next few years? Let's say 3, 5, 10 years. Achal, may I ask you first? What would you really see changing? What do you want to see changing?
I mean, I would just say aerodynamically, the bumblebee shouldn't be able to fly, but the bumblebee doesn't know that, so it goes on flying anyway. So believe in the ability of specially abled people and know that there is no greater disability in society than the ability to see a person as more. And that's what my vision is.
Thank you, Achal. And Achal, I'll remind the audience is the CEO of SHRM in India, APAC and MENA. And if coming from you, Achal, that sounds great, not just for the audience today, but also for prospective people who need that kind of counseling from leaders like you. Devika, if I can ask you the same question. From an operational perspective, you've seen it up front and close. What do you really see happening? And if you can foresee where it is going, what would your vision be about the way things should move?
I think first and foremost, don't make this a number game. Understand why inclusion matters, and they add value to your business. They're not there because it's a good to do thing or it's a tick box that you want to do. So first get those basics right, because then only you'll be able to, or you'll be ready to make those changes, adjustments, accommodations in your system required to bring in a lot more diversity within the organization. And that's when you will start seeing the value. I think us and a lot of other organizations who've done this will vouch that you will not regret those decisions, but you need to now move more towards the willingness stage. Honestly, when we started it, there was nobody who was doing it, and we probably didn't have everything in place. I, on a lighter note, I remember one of the clients had visited, and this visually impaired recruiter of ours, they spoke to him, and they were like, so what do you think? What can we do to bring in more people? And he smiled and said, if Allegis would have waited to get everything right to bring me in, I still would have not been hired. They just did the basic. They made sure I have a screen reading software, I have accessible system, and they got me in. Rest, everything we figured out each other, together.
Awesome. Awesome.
So
Sandeep,
it's just a
sorry.
willingness.
Thank you, Devika. Sandeep, what would you like to see changing?
What I would like to see changing is that at the strategy level, as Achal was mentioning, there are senior leaders who are driving this. And at the operational level, you have ops leaders, HR leaders, TA teams driving the agenda operationally. It is important for some of these agendas to be looked at from outside the box. You have to step off the train while the train is running. You have to step off it and look at it holistically to say, are we inclusive in the way we are strategizing this? Are there gaps? And how do we fill those gaps? Those are very important conversations if you want to be a game changer. The second is the moment you start that journey, and as Devika was saying, just start the journey. As that journey evolves, please convert that to a use case. Please convert that to a business case. Because you are a business leader. At the end of the day, whatever customer you are supporting, whether it's your shareholders, whether it's your customers, they will all see value in what you're trying to do. And today, if you look at more and more focus of investors globally and all, it is around the ESG elements. Now, what are you doing in that S related to this will matter if you're looking at growing as an organization, because you have a talent pool out there. So you got to have that.
Yeah, thank you, Sunny. And Risha, finally, Sarthi means a whole lot, and somebody who's trying to be a Sarthi in that area. Tell us your vision. What would you like to see changing?
I think it is just very, very encouraging to see the dialogue changing in the last few years. People, as you started your conversation, Vineet, was that do we see any resistance as far as inclusion is concerned? Clearly, that is established that there is none. People are willing, but unfortunately, the gap is they don't know how to get started. With so many subject matter experts who are emerging in their spaces, I think what is required is for these subject matters to come together, because somewhere the solution is when it comes together for people to find it at one place. Because I think today people are working in their own silo. There are solution providers who are working in their own silo. They just need to come together to be able to become that kind of a force that corporates know that this is where we will find a solution. That is my vision. I think that is what will make a change.
This screen is a great example of why some silos are being broken, and I'm sure there'll be more that would slowly start to fall away. I do want to thank each of you for your time and for the great conversation we had. This is not the end of these conversations. I do hope that people in the audience have had a chance to learn from these exceptional people who haven't just seen this upfront and personal, but have also applied it quite successfully in organizations. I want to thank Achal for your time, Devika, Richa, Sandeep. Really appreciate you taking the time out to join us for this very interesting conversation. I do hope to see you back again soon. Have a great evening, and thank you, audience, for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.